In a dark night of the year 64 AD, flames engulfed the city of Rome. The fire raged for 6 days, destroying most of the imperial capital. And as buildings collapsed, bodies burned, and citizens screamed, one rumor echoed through the streets. Nero was Emperor of Rome from AD 5468, being declared emperor at age 17 by the Praetorian Guard. Nero was the adopted son of the aging Emperor Claudius, who was likely poisoned at Nero's behest. Overall, his reign was marked by frivolity, luxury, and abuse of power, leading to instability and chaos that eventually ended in civil war. One of the best documented aspects of Nero's reign was the arts. Both the impact art had on Nero and helped shape his world, and how the arts and culture of the times were affected by the will and desires of Nero. Nero had a lifelong love of art, being especially drawn to music, acting, and the lyre. In his youth, Nero focused much time and energy on improving his personal art and becoming an accomplished actor and lyre player. His love of music and theater, other than what some determined were his missing attributes. A baritone voice that changed notes, allegedly lip-syncing other performers. His interest in professionals such as Tigellinus was not generally considered harmful to the state. However, Nero went even further with his performing than just displaying his personal talents. He also enjoyed writing and performing in plays. This brought him into an involvement in the arts, which would end up pervading every aspect of state, art, and official culture. Of his proficiency as an artist, Nero was convinced he was as skillful as Orpheus, his supposed model, and so demanded his performance be honored above all. He was readily hurt or angered if people did not show his performances esteem that pleased him. Nero was born on 15 December 37 AD, was installed as the third Emperor of Rome on the 13th of October, 54 AD, aged just 16, and died on 9th June 68 AD. After 67 years, the Julio-Claudian dynasty came to an end, as did the peace imposed by Augustus, and a long period of conflict began in the Roman Empire. This has also been called the Year of the Four Emperors, due to changes before Vespasian was eventually declared emperor. No. 69. Nero's family, the Domiti, did not belong to the highest social class, that of the gentes. In the year of Nero's birth, 37, the second consulship of his father, he became a member of this exclusive social category. Once Nero became emperor, he was the first to reach that office without coming from the biggest Roman families. He did not belong to the gentes. His relatives were not much liked, and this led to the participation of other families in a power that was not open to them before. The establishment of a despotism in the Roman Empire after Augustus had opposed it explicitly, and the transformation of the Senate into an instrument of the emperor prevailed in this gerontocracy. The very name, gerontocracy, evokes the existing age, structure of the Roman political leaders. However, another meaning of the word gerontocracy is gradually becoming accepted. Over the past few decades, diverse sources have linked Nero to the arts and cultural life in general, beginning with the antiquarians in the first centuries AD up to the most up-to-date scholars. Some of these authors propounded the idea that the arts and culture had flourished under Nero. The antiquarians who authored the sources used this idea to criticize the life and actions of Nero and his family. These same sources also state that Nero played the cithara, entering in competitions. Other sources from around the same time, the Antiquity, the Renaissance, and the 19th-20th centuries, praised Nero's artistic talents and loved to recount the musicians with whom he studied and played, or not played with him. The period of Nero's reign, 54-68, is one of the brightest pages in the history of Roman art. An emperor's desire to show himself as a lover of all sorts of beauty and eloquence rendered great services to the development of arts, hand in hand with financial aid and the welfare of artists. There sprouted up official servility, which went hand in hand with flattery. They offered their mundane goods to please the whims of a depraved ruler and to receive their share of his magnanimity and riches. Ancient sources did not count them as creators because luxurious conditions sheltered them from feeling the real life and nature, the main source of ancient art. For all its shortcomings, Nero's epoch played a remarkable role in fostering the development of Roman art. The reign of the new emperor was ushered in by a burst of poetic inspiration. The city rang with songs written by Nero, the so-called beasts of Nero. Historians call by that name every single poet who hailed Nero as the paragon of all the virtues of poesy and philosophy. Neronic time has provided us with a few names. Among them, Nero's tutor Seneca was one of the first on the list of flatterers. His tragedy, Thyestes, is a series of absurdities of the poetically clad platitudes. If we may interpret it, Seneca uses the language of aristocrats' prudery, but is quite capable of using every means available for guilt's identification. If anybody could, beyond all comparison, embody the image of a model person and follower of the strongest, it was his pupil, Nero. The Julio-Claudian dynasty was a political family of the time of ancient Rome and the first Roman imperial state. The first 5 emperors, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero, are accounted as the Julio-Claudians. Although the last of the 5 emperors of the Julio-Claudian dynasty was a tyrant, like the late ones of the former Flavian dynasty, art and culture of these last Roman emperors were different than the former one, because aesthetic taste from the patrician class influence became much more significant. This change of aesthetic standpoint was mostly attributed to Nero. Nero's era was also called the Golden Age because literature, art, and architecture reached their highest achievements by the advent of Nero. The Nero portraits often showed him in a radiant form, and this style affected official images of icons of all periods. Sculpture in Nero's reign was never overthrown to the vogue of connoisseur, inasmuch as Nero's censorship and annoyance had a check on natural growth. Therefore, the majority of the attributes, sculpture, in the period might be explained within the limitation of the imperial order. Nevertheless, it is evident that numerous acceptable works were being produced under the severities of the Principate. Roman sculpture of Nero once suggested an imaginable progression from one principal current. However, it seems hugely probable that his name must be attributed to a diverse and superior group of silver statuettes of elevated quality, executed from his reign onwards, creating an ensemble of top-level museum pieces composed of divine, other, patrician, idealistic, and female hero statues. The cores of roughly a dozen full-size colossi had begun, which, including 3 known versions of a great Charites and around 10 huge representations of Hercules, were the signature works of a condensed number of exceptionally talented workshops, the foundation of the Neronia, whose Nero, adorning 59 elder, is indeed a signal that in the wake already of his quinquennial one, wanted to get closer to the component representing Nero satisfied. At the same time, such adornments must not be interpreted as mere flattery, but on the contrary, as a spontaneous and sincere tribute to Nero. And the present study has the merit of having demonstrated in an exemplary way the adhesion of the great families of Rome to Prince's restricted circle. Let us also recall the incandescent sun, which Nero forced the poets of the Neronia to put at the end of all their verses. This order arouses spontaneity a smile, but shows the interest in the details by the very emperor. Nero was not only a performer, but also a composer and initiator of events. With enthusiasm, devoting some of his tragic themes to his image and repeating the music that others were already singing before him, since it finds confirmation that Nero wanted instead to compete with those who excelled in practicing his art, participating in it to a greater extent than his comrades, even playing the cithara while interpreting his tragedies. Let us consider then the widespread popularity of Nero as a lyric poet upon his death. That of his poems was also tried. The emperor possessed such isolated pieces as treasured items, and even taxed anyone who dared to have them. If we add to all this evidence other leading personalities who seem equally admired Nero's literary constellations, the matter is now moving in further and more evident contexts. As for Seneca, however, it is not so deep. He set verse to music that praised Nero, whom he considers briefly another Orpheus, and performed it in the contemporaneity of the Neronia, since tragedies of the emperor, as will be clarified, needless of a prince, acquires immediately a particular specializing in speaking in the present case of the philosopher in question, and is approved by the audience. Emperor Nero's passion for theater epitomizes the conditions that prevailed during the Julio-Claudian rule, at a time when all the authors of the satires, without exception, condemned the vice of avarice. Nero squandered tens of millions at a time when he was putting down risings. He was building vast and splendid theaters and stadiums, the greatest and most magnificent part of his private mansions, the gardens that stretched from the walls of Rome to the villa of Maecenas and the villa of Lucullus and reached the district of Pupinia, was the stage and the area for games, enclosed by a canal in which naval battles could be fought. Why should I mention the rest? When this part takes the population of the whole city, Pliny, in his Natural History, writes that on this occasion it was sometimes excavated with great haste, leaving the houses hanging in the air. Violence was used to push back the houses, as if there was a pretended pleasure in the steep and artificial banks bound by high marble walls in such a way that there was no room for expansion and providing support to the people, who were pressed by the weight of 1,000 chains. The citizens inaugurated each new dashboard with a spectacle of blood, forced to celebrate the evil with public money. At least in this respect, Nero, amid the other acts of madness, was able to show the will of a ruler, not of an entertainer, by determining the places and the constructions of such a size that would allow for the simultaneous presence of the city's population. Furthermore, apart from his private mansions, Nero erected a theater of stone that was large, enough to accommodate 100,000 people. Indeed, it was not enough for him to bring this noble and placid artifice. He loved the theater in an indefinable way, and it was obvious to all that he was the most passionate of the dancers whose careers determined the fate of the Roman people. Posidonio, among the protagonists of the combats, was loathed by him for a long time, because he dared to ask for rewards for his merit. There were men who held out for 7 years, others who, out of fear of the arts, sold themselves for an even longer period only to win the favor of Nero. This is why the great and good Roman people, aroused as never before by suspicion and armed with hatred, offered him openly and unconditionally to the Punic fire, the sword, and every kind of unjust death. Neither achievement of any kind can help a prince to win fame if he lets himself fall into that abyss. In whatever place it might be his duty to return, and with whatever spirit he might listen, the proper dwelling would be there. But it was also requested, through emphasis and sincerity, presented to the extraordinary talent whose praises were being sung, that he should not be taken away and removed from each other, but linked together in an indissoluble union. For although their affections and affinities had united them together into the most harmonious union, was Nero a good or bad influence on the arts and culture of his day? The prosecution gives a case based on written sources that depict the biased attitudes of such Christians as Tacitus and Suetonius, and reflects the suspicious terror of contemporary loyal poets. Taking their word for his savage brutality, Nero is a bad influence. The defense invokes surviving works of art that reflect his enthusiastic patronage, which was probably motivated by a genuine interest in them. Weighed in the balance, Nero's insatiable, eclectic tastes, and encouraged building programs in various art and cultural fields seem to outweigh the moralistically oriented reservations of his contemporaries. Antiquity used a propaganda dirge to appreciate if Nero, neither a tyrant nor a democrat, nor a good manager of state revenues, demonstrated considerable interest in Roman artistic endeavors. He did not merely encourage, purchase, and display fine art objects or sponsor building projects. Young Nero had been the youngest participant in quinquennial Neronia affairs, which was held in AD 59. Here he performed two roles, created specifically for his participation, a declamation and a singing contest in the Greek style. The major purpose of the festival was to strengthen his standing as a competent, attractive, and popular heir apparent, capable of ruling Rome. Very often, the debate about the figure of Nero results in an always recurring vision, which is always partial, based mainly upon the extraordinary number of his negative actions. Furthermore, since Suetonius, it is known how the more destructive factors of the personality of the Roman prince exercised a kind of disastrous magnetism, making sure that their figure reached our days surrounded and often hidden beneath an almost grotesque hypercritical facies, giving just an incomplete view of the figure which historically had little recourse. This phenomenon is global, and its characteristic is true for every individual episode, belonging to the range of actions in total. Then, retrospectively, the figure of Nero becomes a kind of mirror of all the defects and negative characteristics, known and imaginable, of the ancient emperors and sovereigns, highlighting and justifying the difficulty in proposing hypotheses, sometimes to the signs of a new valuation of the figure. As a result of this widespread castigation, the responsibility of the discovered inflicted to the memory of the prince and of their connections, which of connoisseur interpreters of worrying or affected subjects was attributed to the innumerable spheres of vulgar and high literature, religious subject, graphic, sculpture, and archaeology. In effect, even though such suggestive examples of damnatio memoriae are not unforeseeable today, the memory of the Nero torch, or to be able to be Nero Deus, preserved itself not only in a fertile, popular tradition, but also in an always consistent way of formal testimonies, which alternate literature with the world of plastic and visual arts. The results of the constant pictorial and numismatic exhumations are evidence of an identity which acts in the mind of the more cultural audience, not corroborating from various sources. These were similar to the traditional phobias closest to the time of Nero, but rather showing the engaging personage varieties of the in agreement only of the age in which death occurred, but making and showing affects and positive artistic declarations. In the end, the legacy of Nero remains one of the most debated in Roman history. Was he a tyrant whose thirst for attention led him to manipulate art for vanity? Or was he a misunderstood visionary, a flawed emperor who dared to elevate poetry, theater, and architecture to new heights? While ancient historians painted him in shadows, the marble and music that survived tell another story of an emperor who saw himself not only as ruler, but as artist. Nero's Rome was a stage, and he, its most passionate performer. Whether history condemns him or not, his impact on Roman cultural identity is undeniable. Perhaps the real tragedy of Nero lies not only in his fall, but in how easily brilliance is forgotten when wrapped in controversy. In the ashes of the past, the art he loved still sings.